not fight in the ocean of life. Float, not fight in the ocean of life. Now, this slogan, I've carved out based on what I had read once, that, have you seen by these popular seashores, look at Hawaii, or maybe you can even find it at Goa. There are those huge waves coming up in the sea. And there are people who are just floating, absolutely on the water, so lightly. Now imagine, how could this be happening? There are those wild waves going like this, but then, it's a sport in itself and you can learn it very well, but that sport gives you a message that if you start learning, the art of floating in life, and if you have to float, that means you have to become almost weightless. Because if you make yourself light, as they say, even go to a swimming pool, there are people who just float like this. The tutor will tell them, if you want to float, just be light. Problems start, who gets drowned? Have you ever seen a dead body drown? The irony of life is that dead bodies float. And living people who struggle, they are the ones who go deep down at the bottom of the ocean. And after they are down, then as dead bodies, they come up again and float. ગુજરાતીમાં બહુ સરસ મુક્તક છે મિત્રો. સમયના પાલવમાં છે બધું દરિયાને દોષ દેશોમાં. સમયના પાલવમાં છે બધું દરિયાને દોષ દેશોમાં. કોઈ તરતો માણસ ડૂબે છે, કોઈ લાશ તરીને આવે છે. See the irony of time. And therefore you have to learn from this, that if you want to really, life is an ocean. And if you have to do best in this ocean of life, you must learn to float and not fight. And if you learn to float, you learn to be absolutely, as I said, without any weights, without any overtones, without any, prejudices, biases in your mind, in your thinking, in your perception, in your emotions, I think you can really, really do wonderful things. And therefore, you have to, what I would call as looking at life differently. We all have to learn what we call this very important terminology of insulation. The electric current, if it is naked, you touch a wire in its bare form, you get such a shock. But the wire, when insulated, all right, you grab it, no problems, right? We all have to insulate ourselves, friends, that we can protect ourselves, our mind, our emotions, our own self and our being and personality from these outside attacks of persons, situations, so-called calamities, adversities, challenges. Insulate. Learn the art of insulation. The choice is yours, friends. If you have to look at life differently, you must first realize that the easiest way to do something is to deal with your own life, because it is your own on which you have full control. And if that is your vision, friends, it will make wonders. There is a law which I call as the universal law of giving. I don't know whether you have heard about it. But there is this eternal law which is known as the universal law of giving, which says, whatever you give for the good of others, whatever you give for the good of others, be it time, love, or money, God keeps on returning to you in much greater abundance. Friends, just practice it out. I am sure so many of the elderly wise people here, they must have experienced it in their life. Whenever and friends, when you give, the problem is you always want to give but with an expectation. And what happens is when you give with expectation, then you get miserable. Because if you don't get... So the best thing is, again, what Gita says, karmanyavadhikaraste means give, do, act, perform, but without expectation. Because most of the miseries of life, they arise from expectations. But if you do things without expectation, I tell you the law of nature is such. God is so merciful and bountiful. Sometimes, we, just as you see the people who are handicapped, people who don't have eyesight or people who don't have limbs, they are gifted with something extra so that they can cover up. In the same way in your life, maybe you may have a wife who is not as understanding, but then God will be nice and kind to you. He'll give you children who are so delightful. Maybe you have some friends who are not the right kind of friends that, you would have expected them to do things to you. God will ensure that He reimburses or reciprocates in some other way. So don't expect. And as I said, if there is goodness that you give, the law of nature will ensure that the return comes to you always. And I tell you, the joy in giving, the sheer joy that you get in giving is one of the most exquisite, one of the most delightful experiences of life.